Good morning. I want to share something with you today that might come as a real shock. The 10 years between the ages of 65 and 75 are rarely the tranquil, carefree, golden years that retirement advertisements like to promise. In fact, a major long-term study by the National Institute on Aging, which followed more than 14,000 Americans over 20 years, revealed that this exact decade is actually the most biologically chaotic phase of your entire life. It places more stress on your physical body than puberty, poses a greater threat to your daily independence than your 80s, and shapes your future quality of life more than almost any other time frame you will experience. The most alarming part of this reality is that the vast majority of people remain completely unaware of these shifts until the changes become incredibly difficult to undo. I am Dr. Marco Rossi, and I have dedicated more than 3 decades to treating and supporting patients moving through this exact phase of life. Over the years, I have watched some individuals continue to flourish beautifully well into their 90s, remaining mentally sharp, physically robust, and entirely self-sufficient, while others experience a steep, rapid decline just a few years after leaving the workforce. I can tell you with total certainty that the dividing line between these two completely different paths is rarely tied to genetics. Instead, it comes down entirely to what these individuals knew about their bodies and how they chose to act on that information. Today, I am going to walk you through the 5 most powerful reasons why ages 65 to 75 represent the hardest stage of life, and more importantly, what you can do about each one. Number 2 on our list today involves something happening deep inside your cells that your doctor almost certainly has never mentioned to you. It is the silent driver behind fatigue, brain fog, and muscle loss. And once you understand it, everything about aging starts to make sense. But before we dive in, I want to ask you something directly. Leave a comment below telling me your age and one thing about your health right now that you wish you could change. Whether that's energy, memory, strength, sleep, or something else entirely. I genuinely read every single comment, and your answer may actually shape the content I create next. Now let's get into this. Number 5 on our list, and a reason that almost no one talks about openly, is what researchers at the Mayo Clinic have termed the retirement identity collapse. This sounds like a psychological buzzword, but the biological consequences are absolutely real, and they are devastating. When you retire, when the children are grown, when the social scaffolding of your working life quietly disappears, your brain undergoes a measurable neurochemical shift. A study published in the Journal of Aging and Health, following over 5,500 men and women between the ages of 65 and 73, found that within just 2 years of retirement, participants showed a 40% increase in depressive symptoms and a 25% decline in cognitive performance on standardized memory assessments. 25% in 2 years. Now here is why this is so specific to the 65 to 75 window. Think of your brain like a muscle. Throughout your working life, your brain was being exercised constantly. Deadlines, social negotiations, problem solving, navigating complex relationships and responsibilities. It was under beneficial stress every single day. Then suddenly that stress disappears almost overnight. And just like a muscle that stops being challenged, the brain begins to atrophy. What neuroscientists call synaptic pruning accelerates rapidly. Your brain literally begins eliminating neural connections it decides are no longer necessary. The biological term is use-dependent plasticity, which simply means your brain is shaped by how much you use it. Stop using it at the same level, and it changes its structure accordingly. I had a patient named Walter, 68 years old, from Columbus, Ohio. He was an engineering manager for 35 years, sharp, disciplined, meticulous. He retired at 65, and within 18 months, his wife called my office nearly in tears because the man she described sounded like a different person, entirely forgetful, disengaged, sleeping 12 hours a day, and seemingly uninterested in almost everything. Walter hadn't developed dementia. Walter had experienced a classic retirement identity collapse, compounded by the sudden withdrawal of cognitive stimulation. We put Walter on a structured program of purposeful learning, volunteer mentorship, and social accountability, and within 8 months, his cognitive scores had improved by nearly 30%, and his wife told me she finally had her husband back. The practical takeaway here is non-negotiable. You must replace the cognitive and social structure of working life with something intentional and challenging before you retire, not after you start declining. Take on a new skill that genuinely frustrates you at first. Language learning, musical instruments, complex strategy games. Join groups that require you to show up, engage, and be accountable to others. Volunteer in a capacity that uses the expertise you spent decades building. And pair all of this with daily physical movement, because research from Stanford University confirms that aerobic exercise directly increases the production of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is essentially your brain's own fertilizer. You cannot address reason number 5 without movement, and we will come back to that connection several more times today. Number 4 on our list is one that I watch destroy quality of life faster than almost anything else I see in my practice, and it is the collapse of what scientists call anabolic sensitivity. Let me explain what that means in plain language, because this concept is absolutely critical. Throughout your 30s, 40s, and even your 50s, when you ate protein, your muscles responded by rebuilding and growing. That process is called muscle protein synthesis, and it is the biological engine behind staying strong, staying upright, staying independent. But here is what happens between the ages of 65 and 75 that your doctor has almost certainly never explained to you. Your muscles develop what researchers call anabolic resistance. They essentially stop listening as efficiently to the signals that tell them to rebuild. A study from the University of Texas Medical Branch found that adults over 70 require up to 50% more dietary protein per meal to stimulate the same muscle-building response as a 30-year-old eating the same meal. 50% more. And yet the standard dietary advice handed to seniors is still based on guidelines written for younger populations. Think of anabolic resistance like a stubborn old radio. When you were younger, the signal came in clearly with minimal effort. After 65, the signal is still being broadcast, but the receiver gets harder and harder to tune. You have to work harder, eat more protein, eat it more strategically, and combine it with the right physical stimulus just to get the same result you used to get automatically. Here is why this matters so catastrophically in the 65 to 75 window. Specifically, after age 70, the average adult who does nothing to counteract this process will lose somewhere between 1 and 2% of their muscle mass per year. That sounds small until you do the math. By age 75, if you started at 65 doing nothing, you may have lost 10 to 15% of your functional muscle. That is the difference between living independently and needing assistance with basic activities. It is the difference between being able to get up off the floor after a fall and being unable to. The medical term for severe muscle loss is sarcopenia, and a landmark review in the journal Nutrients found that it affects up to 29% of community-dwelling adults over 70 and is directly associated with a nearly threefold increase in fall risk. My patient Margaret, 71, from Savannah, Georgia, came to me after her third fall in 2 years. She had been eating what she thought was a healthy diet, but when we analyzed her protein intake, she was consuming about 45 grams of protein per day, roughly half of what research now suggests is optimal for someone her age and activity level. We restructured her nutrition to include at least 30 to 35 grams of high-quality protein per meal, timed strategically after resistance exercise, and added leucine-rich sources like eggs, fish, and Greek yogurt, specifically because leucine is the amino acid that acts as the direct trigger for muscle protein synthesis. Within 6 months, Margaret had lost 11 pounds of fat, gained measurable lean muscle mass, and had not fallen once. She told me at her last visit that she carried her own groceries from the car for the first time in 3 years. The synergy tip here is essential. Protein alone is not enough after 65. You need to pair your protein intake with resistance exercise within a 2-hour window to overcome anabolic resistance. Research from McMaster University confirms that the combination of resistance training plus adequate leucine-rich protein produces dramatically superior muscle retention outcomes in older adults compared to either strategy alone. The scientific references for all of these studies are linked in the description below. Number 3 on our list is something that I genuinely believe is the most underappreciated health crisis in the entire senior population. And it has a name that sounds almost too simple for how serious it actually is. It is chronic low-grade inflammation. And researchers at Harvard Medical School have given it a term that perfectly captures what it does. They call it inflammaging. The idea is precisely what it sounds like: a slow, silent, smoldering fire of inflammation that accelerates the aging process at the cellular level. And it reaches a critical tipping point somewhere in the 65 to 75 window that makes this decade uniquely dangerous. Here is what is actually happening inside your body. Your immune system, which was brilliantly designed to fire up when you are fighting an infection and then calm back down, begins to lose its off switch as you age. Inflammatory signals called cytokines, think of them as alarm bells your immune system rings when it senses a threat, begin to fire at low levels almost continuously. A study published in Nature Medicine tracking inflammatory biomarkers in over 44,000 participants across multiple decades found that chronic elevation of a key inflammatory marker called interleukin-6 was associated with a 63% higher risk of cardiovascular disease, a 42% higher risk of cognitive decline, and a 38% acceleration in overall biological aging. This is not background noise. This is the engine driving virtually every major disease of aging: Alzheimer's, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, osteoporosis, and cancer. And this is where the 65 to 75 window becomes particularly treacherous. Before 65, many people have enough metabolic reserve and cellular repair capacity to buffer the damage from inflammaging. After 75, the damage has often already accumulated to the point where management becomes the realistic goal rather than reversal. But between 65 and 75, you are in the window where intervention is most powerful and most capable of producing genuine biological reversal. This is the window where you can actually move the needle. The anti-inflammatory dietary pattern most robustly supported by research is built around omega-3 fatty acids, polyphenol-rich foods, and the deliberate reduction of ultra-processed foods. Research from the University of California, San Diego found that seniors who adopted a Mediterranean-style eating pattern showed measurable reductions in interleukin-6 levels within just 12 weeks, along with improvements in cognitive test scores and subjective energy levels. Fatty fish like salmon and mackerel, extra virgin olive oil, berries, leafy greens, walnuts, and turmeric. These are not wellness trends. They are molecularly active interventions with documented anti-inflammatory mechanisms. The synergy tip for fighting inflammaging is this. Pair your anti-inflammatory diet with consistent, moderate-intensity aerobic exercise and prioritize sleep. Research from the University of Birmingham found that regular, moderate exercise directly suppresses the overactive cytokine production that drives inflammaging, acting almost like a volume dial that turns down the alarm bells. And sleep is when your glymphatic system, your brain's own waste removal drainage network, runs its nightly cleaning cycle. Interrupting that cycle, as chronic poor sleep does, allows inflammatory debris to accumulate in brain tissue and is now considered one of the strongest modifiable risk factors for Alzheimer's disease. Now right here, I want to pause for a moment and ask something of you. If this information is genuinely changing the way you think about your health right now, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. I upload new content every single week, specifically designed for people in the 60 to 80 age range, evidence-based and practical, because you deserve information that actually treats you as the intelligent adult you are. Hit subscribe so you never miss it. Now, let's continue. Number 2 on our list is the one I promised you early in this video, the silent crisis happening inside your cells that almost no physician ever discusses with their aging patients. And it may be the single most important concept in all of biology when it comes to understanding why the 65 to 75 window is so uniquely difficult. It is the collapse of mitochondrial function. Your mitochondria are the energy-generating organelles inside virtually every cell in your body. Think of them like tiny power plants. They take in oxygen and nutrients and convert them into the cellular fuel that powers every single biological process you have, from contracting a muscle to firing a neuron to repairing damaged DNA. A young, healthy person has dense, efficient, well-worked mitochondria that produce energy abundantly and clean up their own waste products through a process called mitophagy, essentially cellular housekeeping. But between the ages of 65 and 75, mitochondrial function typically undergoes what researchers at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging describe as a functional cliff, a period of accelerated decline that is qualitatively different from the gradual decline of earlier decades. A study published in Cell Metabolism found that adults between 65 and 75 showed up to a 35% reduction in mitochondrial oxidative capacity, meaning their cellular power plants were running at roughly 65% of optimal efficiency. And here is the cascade that this creates. When mitochondria produce energy inefficiently, They also produce more toxic byproducts called reactive oxygen species. Think of these as the exhaust fumes from a poorly tuned engine. Those reactive oxygen species damage DNA, accelerate cellular aging, fuel the inflammaging process we discussed, and impair the brain's ability to form and consolidate memories. The fatigue that so many people in their late 60s describe, that deep cellular tiredness that no amount of sleep seems to fix, is very often mitochondrial dysfunction expressing itself. This is precisely why this decade matters so much. Mitochondria retain extraordinary plasticity, their ability to respond and adapt throughout the 65 to 75 window. But after 80, that plasticity diminishes significantly, and the window for meaningful mitochondrial restoration becomes much narrower. You have a genuine biological opportunity right now that you will not have indefinitely. The most powerfully evidence-based strategy for mitochondrial restoration in older adults combines three elements. First, high-intensity interval training, short bursts of intense effort followed by recovery periods. A landmark study from the Mayo Clinic found that HIIT produced a 49% increase in mitochondrial capacity in adults over 65, dramatically outperforming continuous moderate exercise. Second, time-restricted eating. Confining your eating to an 8 to 10-hour window each day has been shown by researchers at the Salk Institute to activate autophagy, the cellular cleaning process that removes damaged mitochondrial components and allows fresh, efficient ones to grow in their place. Third, specific micronutrients serve as essential cofactors for mitochondrial function. Coenzyme Q10, magnesium, B vitamins, and the increasingly researched compound NMN, which supports production of NAD+, the master molecule that mitochondria require to generate energy efficiently. I want to tell you about a patient named Robert, 69, from Portland, Oregon. Robert came to me reporting what he described as whole-body exhaustion. He was sleeping 8 hours and waking up tired, struggling to walk his dog without needing to rest, and had quietly stopped doing most of the hobbies he used to love. His conventional blood work was essentially normal, which had led multiple physicians to attribute his symptoms to aging and suggest antidepressants. We ran a more comprehensive metabolic assessment and found clear markers of mitochondrial insufficiency. We implemented a 12-week protocol built around progressive HIIT 3 times per week, a 10-hour eating window, and targeted mitochondrial support supplementation. At the end of 12 weeks, Robert's energy scores had improved by 61%. He was hiking 4 miles on weekends, and he told me he felt more like himself than he had in nearly a decade. Robert was not sick. Robert was operating in a body that needed a specific kind of support that no one had ever offered him. The synergy tip for mitochondrial health is to combine your exercise protocol with cold exposure, even something as accessible as ending your shower with 2 minutes of cold water. Research from the Karolinska Institute in Sweden found that cold exposure directly stimulates the production of new mitochondria through a pathway called PGC1 alpha activation, essentially signaling your body to build more and better cellular power plants. And now we arrive at number 1, the hardest, most invisible, and most consequential challenge of the 65 to 75 decade. This one encompasses every other item on our list and adds a dimension that science is only recently beginning to fully quantify. It is the collapse of what researchers call biological resilience, and understanding it will fundamentally change how you think about every health decision you make from this day forward. Biological resilience is your body's capacity to recover from stress. Not emotional stress, though that matters too, but physiological stress of every kind. Illness, injury, disrupted sleep, nutritional gaps, the ordinary physical demands of living. When you were 35, if you got sick, you bounced back in 3 days. If you pulled a muscle, it healed in 2 weeks. If you had a terrible week of poor sleep, one good night restored you substantially. Your body was a system with enormous reserve capacity. It could absorb significant disruption and spring back to baseline almost automatically. Between 65 and 75, that reserve capacity undergoes its most precipitous documented decline. A comprehensive analysis published in the journal Aging Cell, drawing data from the English Longitudinal Study of Aging with over 10,000 participants, found that adults in the 65 to 75 age window showed a 47% reduction in measured resilience biomarkers compared to adults in their early 60s. 47%. And critically, the researchers found that this decline was not linear. It happened in a compressed window, meaning the loss is accumulated faster during this decade than any other. Think of biological resilience like the suspension system on a car. When it is working well, you can hit potholes and bumps, and the car absorbs them smoothly. When the suspension begins to fail, every bump becomes a jarring, damaging event. For aging adults with diminished biological resilience, what would once have been a minor health disruption, a urinary tract infection, a week of reduced appetite after a stressful event, a brief illness requiring bed rest, can cascade into a serious and lasting functional decline. Physicians call this decompensation, and it is responsible for an enormous proportion of the accelerated aging that people observe in their late 60s and 70s. The reason this is number one is because resilience is not a single intervention point. It is the integrated outcome of everything else we have discussed today. When your mitochondria are functioning well, resilience improves. When inflammation is controlled, resilience improves. When muscle mass is preserved and anabolic resistance is managed, resilience improves. When your cognitive and social engagement is high and structured, resilience improves. Resilience is the sum total of how well you have maintained every system in your body. And the 65 to 75 window is precisely when that sum total is being calculated in real time with real consequences for the decades ahead. My patient Eleanor, 73, from Minneapolis, Minnesota, understood this earlier than most. She came to me at 66 with no serious medical conditions, but a deep, intelligent anxiety about what she was watching happen to her peers. She wanted to know not just how to manage individual problems, but how to build the kind of body that would bend without breaking. Over the course of 7 years, Eleanor became one of the most genuinely inspiring patients I have ever had the privilege of working with. She built structured exercise into her life 5 days a week, combining resistance training with walking and twice-weekly yoga. She overhauled her nutrition to address both anabolic resistance and inflammaging. She took on teaching adult literacy as a volunteer, purposeful, cognitively demanding, socially rich. And she treated sleep as non-negotiably as she treated medication. At 73, Eleanor's biological age, measured by validated biomarker panels, was assessed at approximately 61. Her physician's notes from her last annual physical described her as functionally indistinguishable from a woman in her early 60s. Eleanor did not have exceptional genetics. Eleanor had exceptional knowledge, and she acted on it early enough to matter. The practical prescription for biological resilience comes down to 5 integrated habits that you can begin regardless of where you are starting from today. Move your body with both intensity and consistency because exercise is the single most robustly evidenced resilience-building intervention in all of geroscience. Protect your muscle mass as if your independence depends on it, because it literally does. Feed your inflammation, a Mediterranean-style dietary pattern that starves the fire rather than fueling it. Prioritize your sleep with the same seriousness you give to any other medical intervention, because nighttime recovery is when biological resilience is literally rebuilt at the cellular level. And nurture your social and cognitive engagement with the same intentionality you bring to physical health, because isolation and intellectual passivity are by every metric we have as dangerous to aging adults as smoking. Here's what I want you to hold on to as you leave this video today. The decade between 65 and 75 is hard. I am not going to soften that or pretend otherwise. It is biologically demanding. It requires more intentionality than any previous chapter of your life. And the stakes are genuinely high. But hard does not mean hopeless, not even close. Every single item on this list, the identity collapse, the anabolic resistance, the inflammaging, the mitochondrial decline, the resilience deficit, every single one of them is responsive to the right intervention. The research is unambiguous on this point. The body retains remarkable capacity for adaptation and restoration well into the 70s and beyond. I have seen it in my clinical practice hundreds of times. People who arrived at my office exhausted and frightened and declining, who left months or years later with a quality of life that surprised even them. It is never too late to build a stronger body. It is never too late to protect a sharper mind. And it is never too late to live with a kind of independence and vitality that makes every single day feel worth showing up for. If this video gave you something valuable today, please subscribe to this channel right now. Every week, I bring you evidence-based, practical content designed specifically for adults in the 60 to 80 age range, because this community deserves real information delivered with real respect. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. And now, I want to hear from you. Leave me a comment answering this. What is the one change from today's video that you are going to implement first? Tell me your age. Tell me your one commitment. And I promise you, I read every single comment. Let's keep building this together. I will see you in the next video.